The morning after my granddaughter's 6th birthday party, I sat in my kitchen in Sudbury with a cup of tea I hadn't touched, and a piece of paper in front of me that had taken me 30 years to write. The party had been the day before. My daughter had planned it for weeks. The little cake with the purple frosting, the streamers, the goodie bags she'd stayed up until midnight assembling. Penny had worn her favorite dress, the one with the tiny strawberries on the collar, and she had been so proud of herself walking into that community hall, so certain that today was her day. It was not her day, not the way it was supposed to be, and the moment I keep coming back to, the one that will live somewhere behind my sternum for the rest of my life, is when Penny came to find me near the end of the afternoon, pressed her small face against my arm, and said in a voice so careful it nearly broke me, "Grandma Lois, did I do something to make Grandma Sylvia not like me?" I didn't answer her right then. I smoothed her hair and told her she was the most wonderful girl I'd ever known, which is the absolute truth. And then I drove home, and then I sat at my kitchen table, and then I picked up my pen. My name is Lois Abernethy. I am 54 years old. I live in Sudbury, Ontario, where I have lived my entire life. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my ex-husband left when the kids were small. I worked for 26 years as a registered nurse at Health Sciences North, and until this past May, I had spent the better part of a decade quietly absorbing every careless slight my former mother-in-law had ever aimed at my daughter and my granddaughter. Because I genuinely believed, that patience and decency would eventually be enough. I was wrong. And the day I finally understood that, I also understood what I was going to do about it. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. My daughter Claire is 31 years old. She is kind in the way that some people are kind, not as a performance, not because she wants something in return, but because it's simply who she is. She works as a dental hygienist in town, she coaches a girls' soccer team on Saturday mornings, she calls me every Sunday evening without fail. She has her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness, which I consider the best possible combination. Claire married Nathan Calloway 7 years ago. Nathan is a decent man. He works in mining operations. He loves Claire. He is a good father to Penny. I have no quarrel with Nathan. My quarrel is entirely with his mother. Sylvia Calloway is 67 years old. She lives in a large house in Barrie that she has never once invited me to visit, though I have heard it described many times. She has 2 sons, Nathan and his older brother Derek, and Derek's wife Pamela, and their children, 2 boys named Cody and Braden, who are 9 and 11. Sylvia has always made it quietly but unmistakably clear that Cody and Braden occupy a different category in her heart than Penny does. She would never say this directly. Sylvia is too careful for that. But over 7 years the evidence had accumulated the way evidence always does, slowly, undeniably, until you can no longer pretend you haven't seen it. Christmas gifts that were thoughtful and generous for the boys, and perfunctory for Penny. A savings bond for Cody's 7th birthday, a dollar store craft kit for Penny's. Cards addressed to the Calloway grandchildren, meaning Cody and Braden, for every hockey game, every school concert, every milestones. Cards for Penny that arrived late, if they arrived at all. A family portrait on Sylvia's mantle that I once noticed, when Claire mentioned it to me, with a careful, practiced neutrality, featured Derek's family but not Nathan's. Claire never complained. That is who she is. She made excuses for Sylvia the way I had once made excuses for Nathan's father before he became my ex-husband, with the exhausting creativity of a person who needs to believe that the people around them are better than they're showing themselves to be. I said nothing either, for most of those 7 years. It was not my place, I told myself. Claire was an adult. Nathan was managing his own family dynamics. My job was to be steady, to be supportive, to be the grandmother Penny could always count on. But there are some things you can absorb in silence for a long time, and some things you cannot. The birthday party was a Saturday in late May. Claire had booked the community hall at Elm Street because Penny had asked for a real party this year. She'd been to Cody's birthday the previous summer, which had been a full catered event at a rented venue in Barrie, complete with a bouncy castle and a professional face painter, and she had come home starry-eyed and said, "Mommy, can I have something like that someday?" Claire had worked hard to make it special. She'd made the cake herself. She'd put together a little scavenger hunt around the hall. She'd invited 12 children from Penny's kindergarten class, and 3 from the neighborhood. The decorations were purple and gold, because Penny had recently decided those were the best colors in the world. And Claire had honored that completely. Sylvia and Derek's family were invited. They confirmed. They said they would come. They did not come. They sent a text to Nathan at 11:15 that morning. Not to Claire, to Nathan, saying that Braden had a tournament in Innisfil, and they'd made a commitment they couldn't break. Sorry to miss it, wish Penny a happy birthday. Braden's tournament had been on the schedule for 3 months. Claire had chose the date of Penny's party specifically around it. After confirming with Pamela that the weekend was free, I found out about the tournament conflict later. What I knew in the moment was only this: Sylvia was not there, Derek's family was not there, and at some point in the afternoon one of Penny's little friends asked her, in the innocent and devastating way of 6-year-olds, "Where's your other grandma?" And Penny had said with that careful voice, "I think she was busy." She knew. Children always know. I stayed until the very end. I helped Claire pack up the streamers and carry the leftover cake to the car. I held it together through the whole drive home, through putting Penny to bed, through the cup of tea I made for myself when I finally got back to my own house. And then Penny's question came back to me. Did I do something to make Grandma Sylvia not like me? And I stopped holding it together. I want to be clear about something. I am not a dramatic person. I have been a nurse for 26 years, which means I have delivered bad news. I have held hands in the dark. I have worked double shifts and stayed calm in situations where calm was the only useful thing I could offer. I do not make scenes. I do not fire off angry text messages at midnight. I think before I act, always. But I also know the difference between accepting something difficult and accepting something wrong. And what I had been accepting on Claire's behalf and on Penny's behalf had crossed from difficult into wrong a long time ago. I got out my notebook, I began to write. What I wrote that night was not a letter and not a list of grievances. It was a record. I am a nurse. Documentation is second nature to me, and so I documented. Every birthday where Penny's gift from Sylvia had been noticeably less than what the boys received. Every family event where Nathan's branch of the family had been visibly sidelined. Every time Claire had told me, with careful words and a controlled expression, about something Sylvia had said or done or not done, and every time I had responded by telling her to give it time, to be patient, to assume the best. I wrote it all down. It took 2 hours. When I finished, I read it back. I had spent 7 years telling my daughter to be patient with a woman who had never, not once, shown any sign of changing. That was on me. And I was not going to keep doing it. The second thing I did was practical. I had been providing childcare for Penny since Claire went back to work. 2 full days a week, every week for 5 years. I had never charged Claire a cent, which was the right thing and I don't regret it. But I had also been available to Sylvia's side of the family in a way I had not fully acknowledged to myself. Twice I had rearranged my shifts to cover Penny when both sets of grandparents were needed for something related to Derek's boys. Once I had driven 2 hours to pick Penny up from Barry, because Nathan and Claire were both stuck at work and Sylvia had plans she couldn't change. I had been the flexible one, the available one, the grandmother who never needed anything. I thought about what Penny had said. Did I do something to make Grandma Sylvia not like me? My granddaughter was 6 years old, and she was already trying to understand why she mattered less. No, absolutely not for one more day. The next morning was Sunday. I knew Nathan's family were early risers. I had heard this mentioned enough times, and I knew that Sylvia spent Sunday mornings at home because she went to church in the afternoon. I called Nathan first. I told him I needed to speak with him and Claire together, that it was important and that it wasn't an emergency but it needed to happen today. He sounded confused but agreed. I drove over at 10. Claire met me at the door. She looked like she had slept the way you sleep when you're holding something heavy. Not well, not peacefully, but because your body insists. I sat down at their kitchen table with both of them. I said, I love you both. I love Penny more than I have words for, and I need to say something I should have said a long time ago, so I'm going to say it now. I told them what I had observed, not in an accusatory way, not with my voice raised. I had been a nurse long enough to know that the way you deliver difficult information is almost as important as the information itself. I spoke slowly. I used specific examples. I told them about the birthday gifts. About the portrait on the mantel, about Penny asking me if she had done something to make Grandma Sylvia not like her. Claire put her hand over her mouth. Nathan was very quiet. I said, I am not asking you to end your relationship with Sylvia. That is entirely your decision and I will support whatever you decide. But I am telling you, clearly, that I am not willing to keep being the soft landing for the consequences of her choices. I have been available in every direction for 7 years. I have covered gaps and rearranged my life and told Claire to be patient, and meanwhile Penny is 6 years old and already wondering if she is loved equally. That ends now. Nathan said very quietly, my mother isn't easy. I know that, I said. I know she isn't, and I understand this is hard for you. But your daughter asked me yesterday if she'd done something wrong. She is 6. And the answer to that question should never be complicated. He didn't respond right away. He sat with it. To his credit, he sat with it genuinely. Then I said one more thing. I said I'll be calling Sylvia this afternoon. I'm not calling to fight with her, and I'm not calling to give her an ultimatum, but I am going to tell her directly what Penny said, because she deserves to know what her choices have produced. And after that, whatever she does with that information is up to her. Claire looked at me. She looked the way you look when someone says something you have wanted someone to say for a very long time, and you are not sure yet if you are allowed to feel relieved. I drove home. I sat with a fresh cup of tea. I dialed Sylvia's number. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Sylvia, I said, it's Lois. I have something I need to tell you, and I'm going to ask you to just listen before you respond. There was a pause. All right, she said. I told her what Penny had said, word for word. Did I do something to make Grandma Sylvia not like me? The silence on the line was very long. She said that? Sylvia's voice was different from what I expected. I had braced for defensiveness. What I heard instead was something quieter. Yes, I said. She said that to me at her birthday party. After you didn't come. The tournament. I know about the tournament, I said, and I know the party date was confirmed to be free. I'm not calling to argue about the logistics. I'm calling because a 6-year-old child is drawing conclusions about her own worth on what she observes, and I thought you should know that. Another silence. I do care about Penny, Sylvia said, and her voice had something strange in it. Not quite guilt, not quite grief, but something adjacent to both. I believe you, I said, but caring about someone and making them feel cared about are 2 different things. Penny can't feel the care you haven't shown. I heard her take a breath. I said, I'm not asking you to agree with me tonight, but I am asking you to think about it. And then I said goodbye and hung up. That was a Sunday. The following Friday, Sylvia drove from Barry to Sudbury unannounced. Claire called me slightly panicked, to tell me Sylvia was at the door. I told her to let her in and call me when it was over. She called me 2 hours later. Her voice was different, lighter in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. Sylvia had brought Penny a book, a beautiful illustrated edition of a story Penny loved, with her name written on the inside front cover in Sylvia's handwriting. Not a grand gesture. Not a replacement for years of small failures. But real. Chosen, personal, and she had sat down with Claire apparently and said something she had never said before. That she knew she hadn't always been fair. That she didn't have a good explanation for it. That she loved Nathan and she wanted to love his family properly, and she wasn't sure she'd known how. Claire told me this with a voice that was careful and a little raw, the way your voice gets when you've been waiting for something for a long time and it finally arrives. And you're not quite sure yet if you trust it. I said, you don't have to forgive anything right now. You just have to see what happens next. Yeah, she said. Okay. She asked me how Penny had reacted when Sylvia gave her the book. I didn't know. I hadn't been there. But Claire told me. She said Penny had looked at her name written in the front cover, looked up at Sylvia and said, you wrote my name, and Sylvia had said, I did. Because it's your book, and Penny had said in the completely matter-of-fact way of a 6-year-old delivering a verdict. Okay. You can come to my next birthday. Claire was laughing when she told me this and also, I think, crying a little. I was too. Things have not been magically repaired. I want to be honest with you about that because I think the stories we tell each other about families tend to leave out the complicated middle. The part that isn't resolution yet but is something. Sylvia and I have not had a warm conversation. We are not friends. I don't expect we will be. But Penny's last soccer game, Sylvia was there. She drove up from Barrie on a Saturday morning. She stood on the sideline in the cold Sudbury spring air, and she cheered for my granddaughter. It wasn't nothing. It was in fact quite a lot. As for me, something shifted in that kitchen conversation with Nathan and Claire, and I have been trying to understand what it was. I think what shifted was this. I had spent 7 years trying to be so undemanding, so flexible, so thoroughly non-disruptive that I had made myself invisible. I had told myself this was for Claire's sake, to preserve the peace, to avoid adding pressure to her relationship. But if I'm being fully honest, it was also for my own sake. Raising a confrontation is uncomfortable. Naming what you see clearly, out loud, to the people who need to hear it. That is genuinely frightening, even when you know it's right. The tea was cold by the time I stopped writing that Sunday night. My hand ached. I had filled 11 pages in my notebook. I didn't feel righteous exactly. I didn't feel like I had won something. What I felt, sitting in my kitchen in Sudbury at 11:30 on a Sunday night, was the particular exhaustion of someone who has finally stopped bracing for a blow they'd been expecting for years. A loosening. A kind of quiet that felt different from the quiet I'd been keeping before. There is a kind of grandmother. And I have been this grandmother, and I recognize her in many of the women around me. Who makes herself small so that the family can be large. Who absorbs the slights aimed at her daughter. Who says, give it time, and she means well and, it's not worth the fight, until one day a small child in a strawberry dress looks up and asks the question you never wanted her to have to ask. I was that grandmother for 7 years. I will not be that grandmother anymore. Here is what I know. At 54, having raised children alone, and worked night shifts and made decisions I would unmake if I could and made some I would never undo. A child who is watching will always see the difference between how she is treated and how someone else is treated. She will not have the words for it at first. She will translate it into the simplest possible question she can construct. Did I do something? Is this my fault? Am I enough? Your job as a mother, as a grandmother, as anyone who loves a child, is to make sure she never has to stay in that question for long. You cannot always control what the Sylvias of the world do. You cannot force people to love equally or act fairly, or show up when they said they would. What you can control is whether you stay silent about it, whether you keep smoothing it over and making excuses and telling the child, in your silence, that this is simply how things are. It isn't simply how things are. It is a choice someone is making, over and over. And children see it clearly even when the adults around them pretend not to. Pick up the phone. Say the thing that is hard to say, not in anger, not an ultimatum, but clearly and with the weight of what it costs a small person to feel unseen. Do it before another birthday passes. Before another question hangs in the air unanswered. Before another year of patience costs someone you love something she shouldn't have to pay. That's what I know, that's what I'll leave you with. This is Nova Payback. Because real justice begins the moment you stop pretending. You haven't seen what you've seen.